This is not my usual kind of episode.
Well, that was I just, God, we were just standing there and they did the, like the gas thing, and it's like,
That footage is from about a week ago, and that was tear gas, and I'm totally fine. I just got a bit of a headache from it. I'm going to show you more footage that I took of my city, Minneapolis, but if you're looking for clips of violence or confrontation, you're not going to find that here. You can go elsewhere to see that kind of stuff. What I want to show you are the scenes of everyday resilience and the community coming together in ways that probably don't make it onto the news. See, I've been living in Minnesota for 5 years, and I've been married to a Minnesotan for longer. And one thing I know for sure is Minnesotans are tough. They're tough people, and they're tough to break down. The reason for that goes back hundreds of years. So if you're like me and your nervous system is kind of fried from the past few weeks, I invite you to get cozy and stay warm. It's -11 out here, and I'm going to paint this beautiful Minnesotan sunrise while I tell you why it is that Minnesotans are so resilient. So you won't be surprised to learn that Minnesota's cold, and it always has been. So first the indigenous people that lived here, and then later the Scandinavian immigrants who moved here, they all learned the same lesson in different centuries. In a place this cold, you can't turn your back on your community because protecting your community is the best way to protect yourself. It's hard to turn your back on your community when you need them to stay warm, right? So the Dakota lived here in clusters of teepees, and they lived in teepees that had smoke flaps on the top, and they would layer buffalo hide at different layers depending on the temperature to stay warm. They would hunt and forage all summer, and then they would store their dried meat and their berries and their nuts throughout the winter. And the Dakota figured out how to use community to their advantage as a tool to beat the oppressive elements. So the cold enforced a sort of code of ethics, and nobody here could gorge or hoard rations. And going against the group would lead to isolation. And in this environment, isolation often would lead to death. So the white settlers who moved here, they pretty quickly realized that same thing, and they brought with them a strict philosophy of protecting their own community. So I'm talking about the Scandinavians. So Minnesotan culture is heavily influenced by Scandinavian culture. From the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, millions of Scandinavians moved to the United States, and Minnesota became their core hub. So life here was hard for these immigrants. I found a letter from 1854 from a Swedish immigrant named Gunnar Asmundsson, and in this letter he said, "I would not advise any stranger or rich man to come here, but those who are good workers will go on, because one has to work harder here than in the fatherland." In fact, many Scandinavians were Lutheran, and a cornerstone of Lutheran teachings is that the good that you do for your community is a way of getting closer to God. And I think that faith and that service to community helped immigrants persevere and stay resilient back when this was a distant northern frontier. These Scandinavian immigrants also brought with them a sort of early version of minnesotanice, which is a term we hear today for a sort of polite and passive-aggressive temperament. But imagine their world, right? I mean, survival meant being able to borrow a couple logs of firewood from your neighbor just to keep your fire going, or maybe you needed your neighbor to dig you out of 10 feet of snow just so you could get out of your cabin. So up here, you didn't really have the option of being a jerk to your neighbor. You put on a friendly face or you suffered the consequences, and often the consequences meant death. So under very different circumstances to the indigenous people that were here, these Scandinavian immigrants learned that you had to put community first to survive. And surviving meant putting community above the individual. That meant defending their community at all costs, braving their elements out here just to support their neighbors, no matter what that really took. And maybe I look too deeply for history in everyday life, but look at this clip. This is an example of something so powerful, but I just don't think it would ever make the news. What you're seeing are residents of a neighborhood where there was some ice activity, and in this case, they're dragging whatever they could, like trash cans, to block off the roads around where ICE was conducting a raid. And when I asked people why they did this, they said it was for two reasons. One, it was to trap ICE in case they commit a crime, and two, it was to prevent people from accidentally driving down those roads and being hurt by ICE. So Vice President Vance was here a couple of weeks ago, and he described in a press conference what he saw as a uniquely organized resistance. But if you know Minnesotans, you know that there's nothing unique about this strong sense of community. In fact, it's been pervasive since people started living in this region of the world. So I don't know how all of this will play out, but I tend to look for history in everyday life, and I'm reminded of a lesson that Napoleon learned 200 years ago. Never invade a winter people in winter. Thank you for watching. And if you like this kind of content, I have a Patreon. I'm also selling prints of this painting, and all of the proceeds from these print sales that I make will go to the Minnesota Immigrant Resource Action Committee. It's a great charity here that works on behalf of immigrants and especially wrongfully detained people. So there's a link in the comments down below, and I really appreciate you watching. I'll see you next time.